Hudson Taylor, God's Adventurer. Chapter 1, Flat Broke. It was after 10 o'clock on a dark night, and the shabbily dressed man accompanying him was a complete stranger. 19-year-old Hudson Taylor fingered his one remaining half-crown to make sure it was still in his pocket, and looked around him rather apprehensively. A half-crown in those days was about a day's wage for most people. He had been along those poor, narrow streets before, and even in broad daylight they were not attractive. Now, with street lamps flickering feebly at the corners of dark alleys and suspicious-looking people slinking into doorways, the neighborhood looked anything but safe and respectable. It was certainly not the sort of place one would choose to walk in with strangers after dark. But after all, if he was going to China, he must no doubt get used to this sort of thing, so he went on. "Why didn't you ask a priest to come and pray with your wife?" he asked his companion, rather glad to hear the familiar sound of his own voice. The man had come to him with the story that his wife was dying. "Will you come and pray for her soul?" he had requested, and Hudson Taylor had agreed. Now, however, he was beginning to wonder. The man was evidently a Roman Catholic. If his wife were indeed dying, why had he not sent for a priest, of whom there always seemed to be plenty in this Irish quarter of Hull? Why come to a Protestant? The man explained. He had been to the priest. The priest, however, had demanded half a day's earnings down before he would help. Since he and his family were starving already and had no money left at all, such a big fee for prayer was quite out of the question. Starving! Hudson fingered the coin in his pocket uneasily. It was all he had. Apart from 2 bowls of porridge in his boarding house, he had no other food nor money. He could hardly be expected to part with that one remaining coin. He felt unreasonably annoyed with the man, and told him what he thought of him for having got himself into such difficulties. Why had he not gone to the relief officer and asked for help? A dying wife and starving family, and nothing about it, indeed. "I went," replied the man dismally. "He told me to come back tomorrow morning at 11. But my wife, she be dying. She'll be gone before morning, I'm afraid." Hudson's heart was touched. His own position seemed precarious enough, but how much worse off was this man? If only his half-crown were in 2 or 3 pieces so that he could divide it, he thought to himself, how gladly he would have given him one of his coins. The man turned suddenly out of the street and into a dark courtyard. Hudson had been here before, and he remembered the last occasion very distinctly. He had been pushed and punched by the indignant slum dwellers who had torn up the tracts he gave them and told them to get out. Tracts are just like little flyers that tell people about Jesus or, the gospel and about being saved. If he showed his face here again, he would know what was coming to him. The priest with his crucifix and prayers to Holy Mary was welcome enough, but not a young English Protestant preacher. Hudson had departed with what dignity he could muster, doubting he would ever be invited to return. As he felt his way gingerly up a rickety flight of stairs in one of the tenement houses, he sincerely hoped that his presence would not become widely known. He was quite relieved when they reached the top of the stairs and he heard his companion open a door. They had reached their destination. What a sight met his eyes! The dim light from a cheap guttering candle revealed bare boards, a curtainless window, and a room almost devoid of furniture. On the floor in a corner, lying on a straw mattress, was a thin, exhausted woman, and beside her, a newborn baby, not yet 2 days old. 4 or 5 children in ill-fitting clothes, without shoes or socks, looked towards their father and the stranger he had brought with him with large, hungry eyes. Hudson stood silently in the room, thinking painfully about his half-crown. Oh, if it were only in 3 separate coins, he thought. Certainly he would immediately give 2 of them to these poor people. But it was no use wishing. He pulled himself together, remembered that he was a preacher and intended on being a missionary, and decided he must tell these people about God. "Things are very bad for you just now," he faltered, "but you mustn't be cast down. We have a Father in heaven who loves us and cares for us if we trust him." The words seemed to stick in his throat. "Hypocrite," something inside of him seemed to say, "telling these people about a kind, loving Father in heaven and not prepared to trust him yourself without your half-crown." Oof. Hudson gave up trying to preach. The family looked at him in silence as he stood there before them in his long-tailed coat and wide-wing collar, wearing real leather shoes and a top hat. What if his clothes were getting threadbare and his shoes needed mending? Compared with them, he appeared wealthy beyond their dreams. How were they to know he only had a half-crown left in the world? These thoughts depressed him. Oh, if only that half-crown could be divided up. He would give them most of it. He really would, and keep only a little for himself. But it was all in one piece and couldn't be shared. He turned to the man and said, "You asked me to come and pray with your wife. Let us pray now." It would be easy to pray, he thought, as he knelt on the bare floor, but it wasn't. No sooner had he started, "Our Father who art in heaven," than that accusing voice within him said, "That half-crown in your pocket." Excuse me. He struggled through his prayer, feeling more and more miserable, and then stood up. The man said to him in desperation, "You can see what a terrible state we're in, sir. For God's sake, help us." Suddenly, that settled that. Hudson immediately remembered something he had read often in the Sermon on the Mount. "Give to him that asketh thee." Slowly, he put his hand in his pocket. The half-crown, all of it, would have to go. "You may think I'm well off," he said to the man as he handed him the coin, "but as a matter of fact, that's all the money I've got in the world." Surprisingly, he began to feel quite cheerful. "But what I've just been telling you is true, you know. God really is a father, and we can trust him. I can trust him." And he knew that he could. He found himself speaking with great assurance and confidence about trusting God, simply because the half-crown was out of his pocket and in the man's hand. He was amazed at the difference it made to his feelings. He was on top of the world now. He and the family parted from each other on the best of terms. He made his way down the rickety stairs and out into the courtyard, walking home with his head in the air, coattails flapping in the wind. He was singing at the top of his voice, without a care or a penny in the world. When he reached the small bed-sitting room in Drainside, where he was living, and prepared to eat his second-to-last bowl of porridge, he was happy as a king. An interesting thought occurred to him as he sat there. He remembered that he had read somewhere that he that giveth to the poor lendeth to the Lord. It put that half-crown in a different light to feel that, having given it to some poor people, he had merely lent it to God. The idea of lending God a half-crown might seem rather startling, but since it was in the Bible, he knew it was all right. So when he knelt to say his prayers before going to bed, he mentioned the matter of the loan, requesting that it might be replaced soon, otherwise he would have no dinner the next day.
Mom, I want a popsicle.
Okay, 1 second, please.
Can I throw these in the trash?
Yes, ma'am. The following morning began as usual, and he looked at his last bowl of porridge. A hard day's work lay before him, and while one good bowl of porridge was enough to start on, it was hardly enough to continue on. When would God repay that loan? He sat down and began to eat. He heard the postman at the front door, but paid little attention since he rarely received letters on Mondays. Within a few seconds, his landlady appeared at the door. "Here's a little package for you, Mr. Taylor," she said cheerfully, holding it towards him in her apron, for her hands were wet. "Oh, thank you," replied Hudson, rather surprised. He took it from her and looked at it. It was addressed to him all right, but he did not recognize the writing. The postmark was blurred, so that didn't help him either. He decided to open it. Slitting open the envelope, he drew out a sheet of paper. Inside was a pair of kid gloves. "Take it to your brother, please, to help you." "Whoever is sending me kid gloves," he thought, mystified as he opened them up. And then something fell out. It was very small, and it gleamed. He stooped to pick it up. It was a golden half-sovereign, as much as 4 days' wages. He stared at it in amazement. looked through the paper wrapping for a letter, scanned the handwriting and the postmark for a clue as to who had sent it. All in vain. He never discovered where it came from, nor did he really care. As far as he was concerned, it had come straight from heaven. It dawned on him that not merely... Felicity, stop, please.
I need help.
Y'all, she's trying to put ice cream on my back. As far as he was concerned, it had come straight from heaven. It dawned on him that not merely had his half-crown been returned, but 3 more besides. Suddenly he laughed aloud. "That's good interest," he exclaimed jubilantly. "Ha ha! A half-crown invested in God's bank for 12 hours brings me 4 times as much. This is the bank for me."